Today we're going to talk about exceptional hardship, what happens when you accumulate 12 penalty points. So, what happens if you accumulate 12 penalty points? Well, most people know that if you accumulate 12 penalty points within a space of 3 years, then the court must disqualify you from driving for a minimum period of 6 months. And indeed, if you have prior disqualifications of 56 days or more, there are circumstances where that length of disqualification can be longer. It can be 12 months, it can be 18 months. But for today's purposes, we will talk about that 6-month period of disqualification for totting up 12 penalty points. Now, one of the first questions people often ask is, how do you calculate my 12 penalty points within those 3 years? People will quite often come to me and say, well, by the time of my court hearing, I've had some penalty points have fallen off and they are no longer within that 3-year period. Well, unfortunately, what the law says is that how we calculate our 12 penalty points is that we calculate it from the date of the offence. So we take our date of the offence and then we go back 3 years from there and we work out how many penalty points we have in that period. And if we have 12 penalty points, then, as I say, the law says we must be disqualified from driving for a minimum of 6 months. Now, is there anything we can do to avoid that disqualification? And the answer to that is yes. On a technical level, under the same provision that says the court must disqualify us, the court is given a discretion to take account of all of the circumstances and particularly to take account of any exceptional circumstances or exceptional hardship that may arise from that 6-month disqualification. Now, what is exceptional hardship? Well, the truth is, it does very much what it says on the tin. It has to be exceptional hardship. It can't be things that might be difficult or awkward. So, for instance, you can't really be saying that I will have trouble getting to my local bowling club or it will interfere with my social life. Because, of course, that might be difficult, it might be awkward, it might be problematic. But that's what a punishment is intended to be. It's intended to be difficult, it's intended to be awkward. What we're talking about with exceptional hardship is exactly that, exceptional hardship, real life issues that are going to affect you very seriously. So we tend to talk about things such as loss of employment. We talk about things such as loss of home, the inability to care for loved ones that might have, for instance, special needs. It might be issues with mobility and things of that nature. So we tend to talk about very serious things. Now, let's talk about the most common thing, which is loss of employment. Generally, when we talk about loss of employment, we won't just be talking about the ability to commute to and from work, because the first question the court will have is, well, can't you use a bus? Can't you use a train? So again, we're not talking about the question of saying, I'd rather go to work using my car. It will be awkward to use a bus or a train. It's whether or not you can still do your job. So when we talk about the employment question, it will tend to involve cases whereby you need your car as part of your employment. So common examples would be if you're a taxi driver, if you're a delivery driver, there will be very obvious reasons. There will, of course, be other cases where the use of a car isn't as direct, but still your employer will say, if you lose your license, you are losing your job. And examples of that might be, for instance, if you're involved in sales and you have to go and see customers and things of that nature. That could result in loss of employment, and that would then give us a really good starting point for an argument for exceptional hardship. Now, it is, however, more complex than that. Losing your job of its own right doesn't amount to exceptional hardship, because, of course, we don't work because we want to, we tend to work because we have to. We need the money to pay for ourselves, to sustain our families, to pay our living costs. So when you lose your employment, the exceptional hardship will tend to arise in the consequences that follow. So for instance, you might have rent, you might have a mortgage, and if you can't work, if you lose your job, there's a risk you're going to lose your home. That is where the exceptional hardship then will arise. Now, if we move on to consider other things, it might be that you're a single parent family, by way of example, and that you need to be able to transport your children to and from school. You might live in a rural location where there isn't any alternate modes of transport. Those things can be encompassed within exceptional hardship, and particularly we will always look towards those things that absolutely need you to be able to drive, and those things that will impact upon innocent third parties. Because of course, a court might say, it's your error that's placed you in this position. They're not going to be as sympathetic to the hardship that befalls you, but they certainly will be more sympathetic to the hardship that befalls innocent third parties, what we might describe as collateral damage. So for instance, if we're in a situation where if you lose your license, you will lose your job, you might have a family, you might have children, and you might be responsible for paying the mortgage. Well, if the court disqualifies you in that situation, the penalty that the court is imposing in disqualifying you is actually indirectly punishing your family. It's causing the loss of your family home. So that is something to which the court will give more weight. Generally speaking, and if we talk about other things, exceptional hardship isn't necessarily prescriptive, and it can include all manner of different things. I've certainly dealt with many exceptional hardship cases in quite strange terms. I've even dealt with a case whereby a lady had a dog that was undergoing chemotherapy for cancer, and that was one of the constituent parts of the argument for exceptional hardship, the fact she needed to be able to get a dog back and forth from the vets for the treatment. So exceptional hardship can include lots of different things, but I think the important thing to know is that they have to be very serious things. They have to be things that will really impact upon you and will really impact upon your family. They can't just be things that are going to be difficult or awkward or problematic. Now, in real life terms then, when we get to that exceptional hardship, if you're before a court and asking them not to disqualify you, what does that involve? Well, it will involve you giving evidence to the court on oath of that hardship that will follow that disqualification. And ultimately, it will be for you, for your lawyer, to persuade the court not to disqualify you on a balance of probabilities, that those facts are true on a balance of probabilities, and that the court should exercise its discretion not to disqualify you from driving. And in addition to the evidence that you give on oath, it is also best if you can present to the court supporting evidence of that exceptional hardship. So for instance, if you're saying you will lose your employment, it is best to have a letter from your employer saying that you will lose your employment. If it is going to impact on your family, it is best to have a letter from your husband, wife, partner, whoever it may be, explaining how it will impact the family. If you care for somebody else and assist them with their mobility needs, it would be best to have a letter from that person explaining how they will be affected by your inability to drive. Because the court will generally want to see those things to give them confidence that what you're saying is true and that these people will be affected in this way. So in general terms, just because you accumulate 12 penalty points within 3 years doesn't necessarily mean that you will be disqualified from driving, but the important thing to know is that it will be for you to persuade the court not to disqualify you, and that disqualifying you will cause you exceptional hardship and not just be problematic, difficult, or awkward.